the EU should first and foremost speak up and say clearly that by persecuting its own internal opposition, namely the people from the Gulen movement, namely the people from the Kurdish parties, namely other segments of opposition in Turkey, including the HDP, parliamentarians and so on, that Mr. Erdogan is bluntly violating human rights and bluntly violating the commitments of Turkey in the framework of the Copenhagen criteria, which established a basis for acceding the EU. Then the EU should do all it can to support those who are fighting the authoritarian regime of Mr. Erdogan, who is responsible for this backsliding in terms of democracy, the rule of law, and who is responsible for human rights violations. There have been killings in jail, massive arrests, torture, trials that are absolutely mistrials, that are a fake justice, that are a mockery of justice. There has been journalists imprisoned, newspapers closed. I mean, Turkey being one of the countries with the highest level of journalists in prison, media closed, all sorts of, all the arsenal of dictators is now being used by Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. So it's our duty to indeed support all those who are resisting that and who are enduring that kind of repression. And I think among these ways to resist is, first and foremost, to resist the stratagem of Mr. Erdogan, like many other dictators, to actually pretend that his opposers are terrorists, and on those grounds to seek their extradition in countries where they're finding refuge. Today I was able, in the Libe meeting we had, to point out to this outrage of having Mr. Salih Muslim arrested in the Czech Republic by a request of extradition by Turkey, arguing that he is a terrorist. It's absolutely ridiculous that someone like Mr. Salih Muslim, who's been a Kurdish leader fighting terrorists of Daesh in his native Syria, be considered a terrorist. We see that stratagem being used. For instance, Mr. Chabuk in Georgia was also in jail, and for which Mr. Erdogan was also seeking his extradition on the grounds that he was a terrorist. We're talking of someone highly respected in Georgia, who was an educator, who had schools. I met with him. It's ridiculous to try to label him a terrorist. Who is behaving in a terrorist way is actually the regime of Mr. Erdogan, and namely by going after those who expose the ways in which Mr. Erdogan enabled terrorists, namely in neighboring Syria, terrorists of al-Nusra, terrorists even of Daesh, and I believe it is the duty of the European Union to indeed expose these glaring violations committed by Mr. Erdogan and his regime. That's what we do here in the European Parliament, I think, many of us. Our governments play, in my opinion, a much more subdued role in denouncing these violations by Mr. Erdogan, but they are wrong. They are wrong not to speak up. And that's why it's even more important that those who dare to speak up will speak up, and will do it.
It's very clear that Turkey uses the migration deal as a leverage against the European Union to hold us back from criticizing very problematic behaviors from the Turkish government side. So if we really want to stand for human rights and human rights-based, value-based approach to foreign affairs policies, we should take it seriously, and we should be much more robust with the Turks when it comes to their decline in human rights. And one of the tools that I find it necessary to use is to use the stick and maybe implement sanctions on trade, or revoke some of the customs deal with Turkey, just to show that we mean it seriously when we are talking about human rights violations.